most doctors are kind of passionate, about their industry. They're dental nerds and they want to know more about dental, and most of them enjoy learning. So I think it's about fostering an environment that encourages that learning. And I think most folks will gravitate towards that. Like the analogy I'm thinking of, it's like, it's not difficult to push a frog into water, right? It's their kind of natural habitat. All you got to do is just point them in the right direction.
Hey there, dental economist. If you're a dentist owner or a leader within a dental business thinking about growing production, case acceptance, patient and staff satisfaction, positive outcomes, and everything else that comes with running a dental business, then you're a dental economist, and you've come to the right place. Welcome to the Dental Economist Show. We're meeting at the intersection of profit and purpose as I sit down with dental leaders who share their stories about dentistry, business, and growth. All right, welcome back to another episode of the Dental Economist Show with me, Mike Huffaker. Today, I'm very excited to have on the show Lane Theriault. Lane is the CEO and founder of Independence Dental Services, which has now grown to over 50 affiliated practices in the 4 years since its inception. Prior to launching Independence, Lane was a founder and director of a Canadian dental platform, 123 Dentist, which started with only 13 clinics in 2017, has since grown into the second largest DSO in Canada. Lane's roots are in finance, where he first came to learn about the DSO concept. Welcome to the show, Lane. It's great to have you.
Thanks for having me, Mike. I'm excited to be here.
I've got to know you a little bit over the past couple of weeks, and I heard some of your story and was really excited to have you on the show to share some of that. I've also learned that you're a much better shuffleboard player when money is on the line. I would imagine that probably holds true to many things in life. So thank you for joining. To get started today, can you share a little bit about your path that took you from banking to 123 Dentist and then ultimately to Independence?
Yeah, sure. So I was working at Citigroup here in Toronto. So in the M&A department, we were focused on kind of cross-border M&A, usually a US company buying a Canadian one. Kind of my claim to fame while working there was advising Tim Hortons on the sale to Burger King back in 2014. And one of my jobs as the bank was to keep track of what all of our relatively large Canadian pension funds were buying in their private equity divisions. And that's where I, got familiar with this concept of a roll-up strategy or a consolidation of industries, because that's what a lot of these pension funds were holding in their private equity divisions. And that's where I had the idea that, maybe a guy like me who knew something about acquiring businesses might be able to go and build one of these platforms out of its constituent parts and, find a home with a private equity investor. And, that'd be a way to create some walking around money for myself. So I really did not know what industry I wanted to be in. I kind of looked at everything under the sun. We looked at daycare centers, we looked at property management companies, and a whole ton of healthcare. And eventually out of frustration one day, sat down and just took out a blank piece of paper, and across the top of the piece of paper, I wrote, all of the characteristics I was looking for in my ideal roll-up industry. And then on the left side of the page, put all the different industries I had looked at and just kind of drew a little matrix. And then each box, with what little I knew, I put it, 1, a 2, or a 3, and added them all up. And all the healthcare stuff did really well, but dental was sort of this clear standout. And that was the day I made the decision to go into dental. So that's kind of how it started.
That's very interesting. All right, so you did an analysis. You decided that dental was the place to be. So what happened next? How did 123 Dentist come about?
So I started looking for, I want to type it into Google, I want to buy dental clinics, right? And, what came up was this broker in Canada, this fellow named Tim Brown. Tim was having an event at a golf course. And it was one of these things where if you're a doctor, you go and you can meet an accountant and a lawyer and a banker, all the things that you would need to have in place to buy a clinic, right? And so I show up there with my suit and tie on, Mr. Banker. And Tim Brown, basically within 10 seconds of me walking in the door, says, who the heck are you and what the hell are you doing at my events? And knew that I did not belong. And so I started telling him what I wanted to do. I said, I want to buy dental clinics. And he says, you mean like Dental Corp? I didn't even know what Dental Corp was. But I said, yeah, that's right. And he says, well, listen, we're not going to talk here. Let's come meet me at my office. And so I ended up going down to meet Tim Brown at his office and told him what we were doing. And I think he was trying to sniff out whether we were the real deal or not. Eventually put me onto this fellow named Howard Rocket, Dr. Howard Rocket. And he's called Howard when we were in the meeting. He says, I want you to meet these guys. And Howard had a stroke earlier in his life. And so he was paralyzed on one side of his body and kind of warned us that, you got to go and meet him, where he lives. And that's great. And if you can get past Howard, I'll consider working with you. And so eventually we end up going to meet Howard. at this restaurant right by his house and kind of gave him the pitch. And he was sort of nodding politely along the whole way and thinking like to myself, like, we're not getting through to this guy. And at the end, we sort of say like, well, what do you think? And he says, oh, I get somebody like you comes up here every month trying to do the same thing. But I think you guys might be the first ones who could actually pull it off. And so I said, oh, okay, well, that's great. But he says, but I don't, work for free. I want a retainer. So you got to pay me $10,000 and I'll introduce you to all the people that you need to get the deal done. So yeah, anyway, we leave this meeting sort of scratching our heads with, with Howard telling us he needs, this $10,000 retainer, thinking, am I getting hustled here? What should we do? And eventually make the decision that let's just pay the guy and see what happens, right? It's not going to change my life. And sure enough, paid him and he started opening up a lot of doors for us and kind of got us into connected with the right lawyers and knew how to do all the structuring, connected us with some doctors who ended up being some of our first deals. And one of the folks he introduced me to was Amin Shivji, who is the current CEO of 123. And the group of practices he had out west in Vancouver had the 123 dentist brand. And eventually when we sort of combined what we were doing with what he was doing, thought it made sense to kind of keep the brand that he had originally established. And that was kind of the genesis of 123. And we called it kind of the launching of the national platform when we all got together. And so the whole thing took quite a while. It was, we had 13 deals kind of to corral all at once, which took some time, but eventually in the summer of 2017, we closed on that transaction. And that was kind of when the company was truly born. And then from there, we continued to add practices quite regularly over the next couple of years. It was a really good time to be in business. Like dental practices were still going for relatively cheap. The financing environment was fabulous. And so we really had the wind at our back. And that's how we got it up to 70 practices over the next 2 years, almost 2 years to the day, which coincided with the sale to the Peloton Capital guys. So that was our first kind of institutional investor into the platform 2 years later.
What are some of the things that you attribute to the rapid growth that you saw? I mean, to grow to 70 in that short period of time, was there a particular strategy that turned out to be very effective? Was it the leadership team? Was it how you just approached M&A? Anything in particular that you can kind of put your finger on that really led to that success?
Well, I do. I think, but before I say that, I think the timing was really good because there was really only Dental Corp as a big aggregator in Canada for that. So we were the first kind of, large, real alternative to show up. But, we knew that we couldn't just copy Dental Corp and beat them at their own game, right? If we did that, they were going to clean our clocks. And so we had to differentiate from what their offering was. And the one thing we noticed out of the gate was that doctors still really wanted to kind of own a piece of their practice. And Dental Corp didn't offer any minority ownership. Like they bought 100% of the practice and that was it. So that was kind of the big differentiation that we had was, listen, you can continue to own. And by the way, maybe you've got an associate that you promised you would sell him a piece. Well, that we can still accommodate that and you can still be a part of our network. And so it made us quite different from the other offering of Dental Corp and allowed us to provide an alternative to them that was viable and kind of compete for a different part of the market that they weren't really necessarily able to get at.
So you had a successful exit, and a few years later, fast forward into 2020, and you found independent dental services in the United States. Can you share a little bit about the decision to come into the States and kind of your desire to get back on the saddle and do this again?
After we did the Peloton deal, I was still very bullish on the company and, continue to be a big shareholder. But I also had just had a win in dental. And so I thought it made sense to stick with the space, but, didn't really make sense to compete with my former colleagues in Canada. And so that's what kind of gave me the idea that maybe going stateside was a good way to kind of get everything I needed, right? Not compete against myself and also kind of be able to stay with dental. And so, I started knocking on doors down there in late 2019. I think the Dykema conference was just right around the time we had completed the sale with the Peloton guys. So I ended up down there and that's where I met a bunch of those folks and kind of started my journey in the US. And again, kind of luck what was with me, having run the process where we got Peloton and the second highest bidder was a US based private equity company. The guy running the deal was a younger guy, kind of same age as me. And we just sort of hit it off and became friends. And he was a little disappointed he didn't get to do that deal. But I said to him, hey, if I did this again, in the US, would you back me? And he said, yeah, I would. So he wrote me a really nice letter on their corporate letterhead, the basic thing. And we really like Lane and we back on what he's doing. And I was able to kind of take that down to the US and show that to, a lot of the broker community who, were sourcing the deals for me and get some credibility kind of right out of the gate that they knew I had financing and I was the real deal. So the whole story really tied in nicely. And so I was able to put together a group of practices very kind of similar to what we had done in Canada and started working through the closing just in time for COVID to kind of pull the rug out from under me. So my friend at the US private equity group said, Lane, I really love you, man, but like we're not going to be able to do this deal anymore. So I was kind of left with a whole bunch of practices eagerly awaiting to close and no capital to do it. So I spent pretty much the entirety of 2020 on the phone with private equity guys trying to get my deal done. Had a false start with one guy who kind of told me all the things I wanted to hear, but really didn't necessarily have the ability to deliver. And I actually ended up connecting with a group, an investment bank that really specialized in dental, a group called Logan and Growth Advisors, who really did a fantastic job and helped me out when I was in a pinch. Like I was running out of time. We had to close by the end of the year. Like back then, Biden was not yet president or not even president-elect. And a lot of folks are worried that he was going to get in and raise capital gains taxes. And everybody wanted to kind of close in the year 2020. So there's a huge amount of pressure to close. And those folks ended up connecting me with the firm group who we did ultimately close with. And we got our deal done on New Year's Eve, 2020. So right under the line to get everything off and rolling. But I will say this, like that delay ended up being a huge blessing in disguise because it gave me time to really develop a really high quality management team. And I think that's a big part of the reason we've been able to grow so quickly in the US, and because the business people and these folks have really done a lot of the heavy lifting that there's no way I would have been able to do if it was just me on my own.
So we talked a little bit about the differences between the dental space in Canada and the dental space in the United States. You shared like pros and cons of each. You have a really unique perspective of having been so closely involved in organizations on both sides.
Yeah. And I think I kind of got a little bit slapped in the face coming down to the US, realizing just how different it was. So in Canada, contrary to kind of the common perception of Americans have of dental in Canada, it's not like a government pay. There's actually very little government pay. There's no real kind of Medicaid equivalent up here. It's pretty much all fee for service, and there's no real PPOs. The insurers just sort of pay the fee guide. And they pay very promptly, and everything's sort of digitally connected, writes back to the PMS. We don't really have RCM divisions up here. You don't really need it. It's all sort of seamlessly integrated here. And you get regular price increases from the colleges that the insurers just sort of take. So much easier backdrop, and typically tend to have like higher margins here because, our collection ratios are higher. Like, a bad collection ratio in Canada is like 95%. That would be really bad. You regularly see kind of 98, 99. Whereas, 95% in the US is best in class. And so I'd say that was the biggest difference for me coming down there, was having to deal with this whole new RCM beast that I really didn't understand at the beginning, and very much underestimated how complex it was. And I would say, like, I still don't think I have it mastered. And I think many of my peers who've been in the industry even longer than me would still say that, they're in the same boat too.
Yeah, I would say you're definitely not alone on that count. So on the website for Independence, it talks about an unconventional DSO. There's reference that, a DSO for doctors that don't want to be a part of a DSO. So what is kind of your business model with Independence, your secret sauce, if you will? What's the approach that you're taking?
Again, kind of pulling from what made us successful in Canada was trying to differentiate ourselves from the market when we came down here, right? And I would say the traditional DSO in the US, part of their pitch is, they almost kind of tell the doctors that their baby's ugly, right? If only we got in there, you did things our way, this place would rock so much better. And so our kind of approach in Canada was actually quite different to this. And it was, instead of, going after kind of fixer-uppers and trying to make everyone the same, it was, well, no, there's an acceptance that you can have two very different strategies operating in the same market, and they can both be successful. There's not a kind of one right way of doing things. So our vision was to instead partner with successful doctors who kind of already had it figured out, and kind of let them keep doing what has always made them successful. With that implies there's a very high degree of autonomy. And so we typically allow our doctors a lot more leeway in how they run their businesses, and they don't have to kind of conform to a very specific or narrow way that they operate their business. That said, we instead have to kind of manage folks with like incentives, right? So there are guardrails with all of our partners to kind of keep folks on track. And that's the trade-off you make when you work with us, right? We'll give you a lot of freedom, but there's a financial incentive for you to kind of keep doing the right thing and make sure the business stays on track.
And there's still an ownership component for the doctors in the organization.
Yeah, that's right. I would say, typically like the minimum level of ownership at the practice level we want to see is about 20%, but gone higher. We've had many instances where doctors say, well, I want to own more than 20%. I think my business is still going up, but I just want a little help and support. And so we'll go up to 50% in those cases too.
And so in a model where you allow for such autonomy, what are some of the things as a support organization that you're able to provide to help add that extra value provide the additional support that those doctors are looking for? What does that look like?
I think still very similar to what others offer. It's just a lot more customized and a la carte, right? Kind of take what you want, leave what you don't, right? So we've got I'll pick on kind of the marketing department, right? So we've got a fantastic director of marketing, and she's very good at kind of coming in and helping folks, she soup to nuts, revamp everything for you, recreate the whole strategy for you. But she probably only works really closely with about half of our practices, because the other half say, I like the person who's doing my marketing and they're doing a great job and I don't see any need to change. So we have the support there at kind of every area that you would have in any typical DSO. It's just not kind of mandated that you take it. And if things are working, keep doing what you're doing. If you need help, we're there to help.
Now, you mentioned earlier that building a high caliber management team is incredibly important. What are some of the things you look for when you're bringing on new executives into your organization, or you're looking to build out that corporate structure?
It's less about kind of like specific characteristics of the people. There's kind of more like a general rule that like I like to follow. So I always like, whenever we make a hire, I always ask like, okay, when we're hiring this person, are we elevating the average of the caliber of people on this team? Because if we're not, like, we're moving the average of the team lower. So we're always trying to hire people that are better than what we have right now, right? And I would say like the biggest arbitrage that exists in business is people. And, if you can get a B player for $70,000 a year, but you can get, an A player for $140,000 a year, you are usually getting more than 2 times the output out of that $140,000 person than the $70,000 person. So I would say, like my advice to people is if you want to really choose your output in your organization, go after the best, because the return that you get is kind of exponential on that curve. If you pay kind of top 10 percentile, you're not, you might pay 2 times what you got to pay for that average person, but you're getting potentially 10 times the output. That's kind of the way I think about it broadly. And then the rest is kind of details sort of about, fit and how are they good at their role. Generally speaking, follow that path, it kind of takes care of 90% of the battle.
Yeah, it really is so true. And it feels like it's a short-sighted approach that many people will often take, where you want to find that candidate that is less expensive. But then if you have to turn that person over within a year or 12, 18 months, the replacement cost on top of the lost opportunity costs on top of everything, if you were just paying more and got the right person, it would make all the difference in the world. So I can completely appreciate that. With your background in banking and finance, how do you feel like that makes you uniquely suited to running a dental service organization? What type of benefit do you think it's provided to you? Do you think that's a good background for people to go into leadership in DSOs?
I'm not sure that it has made me like a great operator. I still don't really fancy myself like a fantastic DSO operator. I think there's like people out there who know a lot more about it than I do. And I think I've kind of succeeded in spite of my very kind of narrow background. Like where it has helped me is really on kind of like the deal making side. So I think trying to find common ground with our partners and kind of getting creative on how to make, private equity guys and the banks happy on one side and the dog like that. I think marrying those two, that's where I think I've been able to kind of put my special secret sauce on it and kind of add something of value. But really what has most made me successful is relying on others to tell me what to do and not telling other people what to do. So, hiring those really high quality people, listening to them. I ask a lot of questions about why do we think we should do that? And why do you think we should do this? And kind of helping the organization come to the best answer. But like, I'm not the one who's coming up with most of the great ideas and really delivering on it. So I think it's more about not thinking you know everything. And actually some of the biggest mistakes I've made in my life when I was sure I knew what I was doing was the right thing and not really paying attention to what some of the other smart people around me were doing.
So on that note, I've been in dental now for about 5 years, and it's pretty steep learning curve. And every day still learning something new. From your perspective, where do you go to learn? Like you talked about, hey, look, I probably still haven't nailed this RCM thing. And I agree completely. I don't think I've talked to anybody that believes that they've nailed the whole RCM thing. But when you think about continuing to grow as an operator and to know more about this industry or the business in general, what are your pathways to learning?
I think everybody learns kind of differently. And so don't do what I do just because it's what I do. But like, I really enjoy kind of the human interaction component and talking to experts and kind of poking and probing and learning a little bit more about what they say. And I will then kind of find the thread that I think is interesting from a conversation and go and do kind of my own homework from that. And it might not even be me doing the homework, right? It could be one of my people saying, hey, I heard something interesting here. Can you go and investigate this? But I think that's kind of the way I like to do it, because if you're only reading articles online, like you don't get a lot of context, you don't get that interaction, you get a deeper understanding. So for me, it's really about kind of just talking to as many experts as you can and having that dialogue.
Yeah, you mentioned Dicoma earlier, which is a fantastic show. Are there any other conferences that you attend or events that you find that you receive value from?
I think the ADSO group, which is our sort of industry association, has done a really fantastic job of putting together some events that are focused on something specifically like RCM and becoming a resource for knowledge for the industry. So I would say like that would be my next kind of go-to, specifically if you're looking for kind of learning and expertise in the business.
I want to go back to the inception of independence again. I was just kind of reflecting on the fact that you had mentioned that it was right before COVID. You talked about kind of the challenges that were taking place with you securing the funding and the finances, that you were able to get the signature and close the deal that I think the last day, New Year's Eve of 2023, January 2020, sorry. And then COVID did come and COVID kind of hit. And so when you think back over that like 4 to 6 month stretch, I sometimes think about the really difficult times that we go through and then like how they ultimately end up changing us and I think ultimately making us stronger. But did you perceive during that time, was there ever worry that like this just isn't going to happen or this business is just not going to get off the ground?
Oh yeah. Are you kidding me? Yeah. Like there's like definitely some dark days, peak stress. End of the day, I consider myself an entrepreneur. And like that is the entrepreneur life. The highs can be really high, but the lows can be really, really low as well. So for sure. But I think like I tend to be like more persistent than even like logic should dictate, right? And I just kind of I just keep pressing on. I'm going to keep pressing on until like literally there's no more money in the bank account. And like, you know, my wife says you need to go get a real job. Like that will be the moment where I'll finally throw in the towel, like even if things haven't been going my way before that. So yeah, I think like persistence has certainly paid. And I would say that, you know, there were dark days in the 1, 2, 3 days when we were getting started as well, where it didn't look like things were going to go through. So that has been a persistent theme in anything I've done. And that you kind of got to go through, you know, that dark valley to come out the other side if you're going to reap the rewards.
And if you think back to 2020 and to COVID, was there a moment where you kind of realized like, you know what, we are going to be okay? Because there was so much uncertainty for such a long period of time. There were practices that were being forcibly closed before they were able to open up for just kind of what was deemed essential procedures. And it was just very uncertain as to like what that was going to look like moving forward. Was there something that you could point to finger where you had the confidence where you're like, you know what, this is going to be all right, like we're going to get through this? Or was there always just the notion that dental is essential and you're going to have dental, and if we can just continue to plow forward, we will get to the other side?
So I would say like it was like a very specific moment, but I could see where we were, you know, we hadn't acquired any of these businesses yet, and we were, you know, monitoring them every month. And you know, I had one of the doctors at the end of every month, literally the first of the month, he'd send me his results for the prior month, right? He said, look how great it's going, right? So I'm looking at these results and I'm going, okay, look, things are good, but like on the other hand, you know, nobody kind of wants to loosen the grip on the, you know, the purses yet and make these investments, right? And I just knew like that had to break at some point, right? And for me, it was really just about like, am I going to have enough time on the clock to have that unthaw and get through it? So yeah, I wish I could point to like a specific moment. I don't think it was like that, but it was just like a constant trend of things getting better and better on the operating side. And then you can't have this and not have the other. And I knew it was only a matter of time until things turned around.
Yeah, it seems over the past couple of years that M&A generally slowed down, though. If you look at the success that you've had at Independence, you've still been incredibly successful at acquiring new practices and affiliating with new doctors. A lot of the reason for that has been the high interest rate environment. Money is expensive. It doesn't seem like valuations necessarily shrunk in accordance with the cost of the money. As we kind of just got our first interest rate reduction recently, and you look towards the future, do you anticipate an acceleration of M&A again? Do you think it's going to go back to the levels where it was before? And if so, like how soon do you foresee that happening?
I'm a little more like tepid on my view of kind of the future here. I think the reason we saw such robust pricing in kind of the 2021, 2022 years. And you could even say that's a continuation of the kind of the pre-COVID trend, 18, 19. A lot of money came into the space, right? Like the stat that everybody was throwing around when I was, starting my business was, there's 100 private equity backed DSOs in the country. And when there's that many participants, like prices are going to go up, right? And I think there was this kind of land grab mentality with a lot of folks that just like buy anything, pay whatever. And like, we'll worry about the fallout later because we're, it doesn't matter if we're paying 10 times, we're going to sell these things for 14 times. And that 14 times assumption turned out, to not hold in the long term, right? I think, there's very few platforms that could, get that today. And a lot of debt that was cheap and now no longer is cheap. And like, let's not forget, the effect of inflation, like in many of our businesses, like you are taking a fixed price and your costs have gone up. So you're getting squeezed on margin, you're getting squeezed on interest rates. And that has washed out a lot of folks, right? Like, I don't think any of us know the exact stats, but some folks in the industry that I trust and respect, tell me it's anything from like half to a third of that. Those 100 private equity backed DSOs were in some kind of technical default or full default, and, the lenders own them now. So that's taken out a lot of participants from the market. And I think we are actually seeing, like, at least from my vantage point, like pricing has come down and we're able to be a lot more kind of thoughtful and slower in our approach. Before it's kind of like a big rush to get in because if you didn't go, the guy beside you is going to go. And we're getting a lot more time to kind of really get to know our partners and make sure we're making, the right decision, which I think is almost more valuable than getting like a good deal, getting a low price, right? It's having certainty around the transaction. So that has made our lives easier and gives me like a lot more confidence in kind of our ability to grow kind of sustainably into the future. And what I'm optimistic about is that there's less folks at the table, less or more meaningful conversations, kind of better quality connections, and that we're getting the right fit. I just don't see us getting back to kind of the rip-roaring 2021's 2022, but we're not going to be like COVID bad either. We're kind of going to be a little more steady middle of the road from here on in.
Yeah. So that allows or affords the acquirer probably more choice and ability to really identify excellent practices to join the organization. If you were an independent practice today and you had a view or a desire to join a DSO and sell a portion of your practice, what's some of the advice that you would give that business that would put them in good shape or have them reflect well during a diligence process for acquisition?
I think the more organized you can be, the better. And that's a simple thing. But do you produce your financials on a monthly basis? That's a big one. If you got like a stable staff base and kind of taking advantage of all the opportunities that are available to you, I would say like asterisks on that one. If you're squeezing every last drop out of the business, that can actually make you like less attractive. Like I know we've looked at some really successful businesses and we kind of go, listen, we're really impressed with what you've done, but what's left for us to help you with, right? Like it's growth limiting. So I would say like, it's nice to kind of leave some opportunities for the next guy. But I would say generally just a general organization is kind of the best approach and be buttoned up with your processes. Having a solid collection ratio, right? And how to collect, that's a really big one. Is your website up to date? Can people book an appointment easily? Like those are the things that sound very simple, but are often neglected. And they're signals to us that, how good of an operator are you really?
Do you have any preference for practices in urban areas versus rural areas or underserved communities? Or like, how do you view that portion of the process?
Yeah. So I mean, like the dichotomy here, right, between kind of urban and rural that I found is, in the rural communities, you're never going to want for patients. The patients are going to be there, but you're going to have a hard pressed for providers. And in urban markets, it tends to be the opposite, right? There are lots of providers, but you got to fight tooth and nail for the patients. So my kind of favorite markets are what I would call like the urban halo, where you're not directly in the core of a major metro area where costs are high and competition is fierce, but you do have like a large pool of providers that you can drop them in that metro area. So I look to kind of like the suburbs, probably be my favorite if I had to pick. Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. As you pull out your crystal ball and look at the future of dental, what are some of the factors that make you bullish on the industry?
I actually think like there's some really interesting stuff happening in the technology world. Like, this Curodont thing is really impressive, right? Like that kind of changes, the standard of care for what we're going to do at the first kind of signs of decay. So I think that's really interesting. I also think a lot of the 3D printing technology appears to be really coming along now. Like some of the doctors that I talk to are starting to get comfortable using a 3D printed crown. And some of our doctors are printing their own clear aligners in the practice now. And so what used to take, a huge factory and enterprise to do or now can be done in any clinic. So I think that's really interesting from kind of a control and an ability to kind of vertically integrate your practice, if that makes sense. And so that's why I'm bullish on it. And I think generally just people are more and more interested in their health. And there's like obviously a huge connection with oral health to overall health. And so I think that trend is not going away anytime soon, especially as the younger generation coming up. As you go through life here, you move into this higher income practice, you can take care of your health. And these are the most health conscious people, the most health conscious generation, I would say. So I think there's lots to be bullish on in terms of our industry.
How do you think of specialty, either incorporating it into your organization or adding orthodontics or standalone practices, perhaps, that would be kind of like with a network for referrals? Is that part of your strategy at all?
I am somebody, I'm pretty opinionated on this one. I really avoided partnering with specialty practices, and we have opted to instead encourage our doctors to bring specialty in-house. And my kind of view on this is it is an inconvenience for the patient to have to leave in a practice where they are comfortable and a practitioner they're comfortable with to go to a specialist. And, if we were owning that specialist facility, well, that's another set of costs that we have to deliver the same level of service that we could potentially deliver in our own practice. And a lot of folks have mentioned this hub and spoke strategy where, we're going to acquire one specialist in one area and have these GP practices around. They're going to refer to that doctor. In my experience, I think doctors are rightly uncomfortable to sort of send everyone to one specialist that they may not know or trust. And so for those reasons, I have shied away from specialty, but we certainly employ a lot of specialists in our GP practice, which I guess are technically multi-specialty practices. That's the model I prefer.
So what are the challenges with doing that? Is it finding specialty providers? Is it getting a dentist to start performing specialty procedures? Like, what are some of the obstacles and how do you solve for them in order to provide that better patient care? Because I agree, it would be amazing to have everything done in the same place where you are familiar and comfortable going to. Plus, the referral process for most people is terrible. I had to get a crown a while ago and it was like, hey, here's a piece of paper. You need a root canal. Go call these people and schedule this appointment for something that you really don't want to do anyways. And like, we're not going to have any more part to play in this. And like, good luck to you. And hopefully we see you back to put the crown on afterwards. I was like, what? This is a ridiculous process. But when you're looking to bring more specialty in-house, how do you go about it?
Yeah, I'll definitely, I take your point. It's easier said than done. The facilities are not always set up in a way that allows you to do it. You may not have space. Getting a provider to come in once a month to do the wisdom teeth, for example, is, asking a lot for somebody who would prefer, why wouldn't I just go work at a specialty clinic where I can, work day in and day out? So there are definitely challenges. I think partnering with someone like us where we have scale and kind of relationship with organizations that specialize in these types of things and are okay, they've got a deep bench of customers, which are dental clinics that they provide, specialty services to, is how you can kind of solve for that. And then I would say, but the preferred method is to train up doctors. I think like generally what I have found is that most doctors are kind of passionate, about their industry. They're dental nerds and they want to know more about dental, and most of them enjoy learning. So I think it's about fostering an environment that encourages that learning. And I think most folks will gravitate towards that. Like the analogy I'm thinking of, it's like, it's not difficult to push a frog into water, right? It's their kind of natural habitat. All you got to do is just point them in the right direction. So that'd be the way I think about it.
I like that analogy. We'll wrap up here in just a couple minutes. But when you think about some of the biggest problems in dental that you wish could be solved, either through technology, regulation, new laws, legislation, anything. What would be, in a perfect world, something that you could kind of like snap your finger and have no longer be an issue in the business?
A loaded question for only a few minutes left, Mike. There's a lot to pick at there. I think it's unfortunate, a lot of the regulations and the rhetoric around kind of private equity in healthcare. I think that's a hugely uneducated position. Like this is a source of investment that increases the capabilities, increases the efficiency and access to care for people. So that's probably one area that I think we're moving in the wrong direction. I would say the other sort of big one is the whole payer dynamic that we talked about earlier, the difference between Canada and the US. Having seen what is possible in Canada, like there's really just no reason for this. And like my view, and this, I'm not far from an expert on this, but it seems to me that the insurers are carrying a huge amount of cost to deliver this antiquated system so they can get this benefit folks not taking advantage of claims that they're entitled to. And, there's kind of like a time value of money benefit, right? We don't have to pay right away. But I think what I'm optimistic about is that the timing with now this new automation coming into play will eventually bring this to its natural end, because, you're seeing a lot of the technology kind of usurping the intentionally poorly designed processes in the insurers. And so they're not going to get the benefit anymore, right? We're going to start, having the bots versus the bots on the calls for, patient verifications and things. And eventually they're going to go, okay, we're not getting the benefit. Like, let's just move into the 21st century. Or so I do think that actually does get better here. I just don't know if it's in the next 5 years or 10 years, but it's coming to an end, and we will see efficiency there finally kind of returned.
Well, I almost made it through an entire episode without saying the word AI, but I'm not going to finish without saying the word AI. So I'm just curious from your perspective, either in your day-to-day role or within your organization or even in your practices, are there areas that you're currently utilizing AI technology?
Many, yes. And I would say where it's most prominent is on these AI diagnostic tools. They are incredibly useful. And I would say not for what you would think. Like, I don't think there are many doctors out there who think that this is somehow finding treatment opportunities that they would not have otherwise found. I think like most doctors would say that, right? That's not what makes them useful, right? What really makes them useful is from a case presentation perspective, right? Where you can show the patient, say, hey, it's not just me. Even the computer here has diagnosed that you've got a cavity here. Like, what do you want to do about it? And so it kind of removes that doubt from the patient's mind that this is medically necessary, that you got to do it, and takes away that fear that, I'm just being sold on something that this dentist is trying to make money off of me. And we have seen that like in the data, when our diagnostic system is on, case acceptance is higher. And there's been times where it's gone down and we can see case acceptance go down. So I'm very convinced that it is a very useful tool for that. And we have almost rolled it out to all of our practices. It's such a powerful tool.
Do you mind sharing which tool that you guys are using?
I was trying to avoid being partial here, but I will share. It's Overjet.
Okay. All right. Fantastic. We have a good partnership with Overjet. It is a pretty impressive technology. Awesome. Well, hey, thank you so much, Lane. Really appreciate the time. It was great to have you on the show, and appreciate you joining.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate the bearded hat podcast environment that you've fostered here. It's very inviting.
That's right. It's a very safe space. Yes.
Yeah, I love it, Mike. Nice to chat with you, buddy.
You too. The Dental Economist Show is brought to you by Planet DDS, home of Dental OS. To find out more about how cloud-based dental software by Planet DDS helps unleash dentists and their staff to focus on patient care, visit www.planetdds.com. Stay tuned for upcoming episodes by following wherever you listen to podcasts. And thank you for listening.